Welcome back to the channel. What if I told you that the smallest, most ignored coin in your pocket right now could secretly be tied to one of the most shocking money stories in American history? A story so wild that collectors, dealers, and everyday people still argue about it in hushed tones, because hidden behind dull silver color and a date most people never look at is the 1987 D1 dime USA coin. A coin with a face value of just 10 cents, but a legend that has exploded into claims of a jaw-dropping $23 million for the right example. And before you laugh and scroll away, understand this. Almost every record-breaking coin story in history started exactly like this, with people saying no way, that's impossible, until someone checked a coin closely and realized they were holding something the world had completely overlooked. Because 1987 was a strange and chaotic year inside U.S. coin production, a year when minting pressures, metal sourcing changes, die wear, and quality control issues collided in ways the public never noticed, and the Denver Mint, marked by that tiny D, was pushing out millions of dimes at high speed to keep up with circulation demand. And when mints rush, history proves mistakes happen, rare mistakes, once-in-a-generation mistakes, the kind that later become the most valuable coins ever sold. And this is where the urgency begins. Because the 1987 D dime isn't valuable just because of its date or mint mark. It's valuable because of what can go wrong during the year: wrong metal composition slipping through, experimental planchets mixed into production, dies clashing, doubling, misalignment, off-metal strikes, and microscopic details so rare that only a handful of coins are believed to exist, and those few coins are what collectors whisper about when they talk about eight-figure dimes. Because when a coin combines the right year, the right mint, the right era, and the right condition, value stops making sense to normal people. 10 cents becomes 10,000, then a million, then numbers so high they sound fake. But auctions don't lie, private sales don't lie, and history doesn't lie. And the reason the 1987 D dime story hit so hard is because most of these coins were spent immediately, used to buy coffee, candy, gas, tossed into jars, dropped on sidewalks, scratched, worn down, destroyed by time. Meaning the survival rate of perfect or error examples is insanely low, and rarity is the oxygen of value. Without it nothing matters, but with it even the smallest coin becomes legendary. And here's the part almost nobody tells you: the Denver Mint in 1987 produced hundreds of millions of dimes, but production numbers mean nothing when you're hunting anomalies, because errors don't care about totals, they care about moments. A few seconds when something went wrong and no one noticed, a wrong blank fed into the press, a worn die not pulled in time, a misstrike that slipped past inspectors, and once that coin leaves the mint, it's gone forever, unless someone decades later realizes what they have. And this is why people are right now tearing through old change, estate collections, inherited jars, bank rolls, because every single year new discoveries still happen. Coins thought impossible suddenly surface, and when they do, the market goes insane, prices explode overnight, and the people who waited are left watching from the outside. Because once a discovery is confirmed, the supply never increases, it only locks in forever. And with the 1987 D dime, the hype is driven by extreme rarity stories, rumored off-metal strikes on planchets meant for other denominations, ultra-strong doubling that looks unreal under magnification, strike errors so dramatic they look like science fiction, and conditions so flawless they defy the idea of circulation. Coins that should not exist, yet do. And when something should not exist, collectors pay anything to own it, because owning it means owning a piece of chaos in history. And this is why the $23 million figure keeps coming up in discussions, not for an average dime, not for a worn one, not for the one you find under your couch, but for the perfect storm example, the unicorn, the one that checks every impossible box. And here's where urgency turns real, because you don't need to be rich to search, you don't need connections, you don't need permission. All you need is awareness, patience, and the willingness to actually look at your coins instead of spending them blindly, because the truth is painful. Millions of rare coins have already been lost forever simply because people didn't know what to look for. And ignorance is the most expensive mistake in coin collecting, far more expensive than buying the wrong coin. And right now, someone has a 1987 D dime sitting in a jar that could change their entire life, and they have no idea. And that someone could be you, because value doesn't announce itself. It hides, it waits, it blends in, and only rewards those who slow down and pay attention, and history proves this over and over again. Every major coin discovery was accidental, found by someone curious enough to look twice, someone who didn't rush, someone who asked, why does this look different, weigh different, shine different, strike different? And in the case of the 1987 D dime, differences can be incredibly subtle or shockingly obvious. But either way, once you miss them, the opportunity is gone, because once a rare coin re-enters circulation, damage begins immediately, value collapses, and the window closes forever. And that's why collectors say the most expensive coins aren't locked in vaults, they're hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes. And think about this, the dime is the least respected coin in daily life. People drop them, ignore them, give them away. And that makes it the perfect hiding place for something priceless, because nobody expects wealth in a dime. And that psychological blind spot is exactly how legends are born. And the 1987 D dime has become one of those legends, passed around in collector circles, debated, argued, doubted, yet never dismissed, because enough strange examples exist to prove something unusual happened that year, something that still hasn't fully been documented. And undocumented anomalies are the most dangerous in collecting, because they represent unknown potential, and unknown potential is what drives extreme prices. And the reason you should feel urgency right now is simple. The longer time passes, the fewer untouched coins remain, the fewer chances there are to find high-grade or error examples, and the more competition enters the hunt, because awareness spreads fast, and once everyone is looking, the advantage disappears. And we are at that tipping point where stories like this are no longer underground, they're leaking into mainstream attention. And when that happens, banks get searched, rolls get stripped, collections get cherry-picked, and the easy finds vanish, leaving only regrets behind. And imagine the regret of realizing you spent a coin worth more than houses, more than businesses, more than generational wealth, all because no one ever told you to look. And that's why the story matters, not because every dime is worth millions, but because one might be, and the cost of checking is nothing. But the cost of ignoring could be everything. And this isn't about luck, it's about probability, because if millions of people never check, and one person does, that one person changes their life, and history remembers them, not the millions who didn't look. And right now you are at that decision point. Scroll past or pay attention, dismiss it or investigate, laugh it off or learn more, because history rewards the curious, not the comfortable. And the 1987 D dime is still out there, still circulating, still waiting, and every day that passes is another day it could be damaged, lost, or spent. And that ticking clock is what creates real urgency, not hype, not exaggeration, but the simple truth that time destroys value faster than anything else. And if even one person watching this checks their change and finds something extraordinary, this story becomes real in the most powerful way possible. And before you brush this off, remember that every impossible coin story started as a rumor, then a whisper, then a discovery, then a headline, and the only difference between those stories and yours is action. So check your dimes, check your jars, check your old collections, because 10 cents could be tied to $23 million of history, and moments like this don't repeat forever. And if you want more hidden money stories like this, more coin secrets the world ignores, more chances to catch value before it explodes, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us, because the next coin we talk about could be sitting in your pocket right now. Next, 1976 1 dime USA coin. What if the most overlooked dime in American history? A coin people casually spent during bicentennial celebrations, fireworks, and backyard barbecues, was secretly tied to a $31 million legend that still shakes the numismatic world today, because the 1976 1 dime USA coin is not just another piece of pocket change. It is a silent witness to a once-in-a-lifetime moment in history when the United States was celebrating 200 years of independence while its mints were under intense pressure to produce massive quantities of coinage at record speed. And whenever speed, symbolism, and scale collide, mistakes follow, rare mistakes, historic mistakes, the kind that turn ordinary metal into generational wealth. And this is where the story begins, not in an auction house, not in a museum, but in everyday circulation, where millions of Americans handled dimes without ever imagining that one example from this exact year could one day be spoken about in the same breath as legendary multi-million-dollar coins. Because in 1976 the nation was obsessed with commemoratives. Attention was focused on quarters and half dollars with special designs, while the humble dime quietly continued production with its familiar Roosevelt portrait, slipping under the radar, ignored by the public, ignored by collectors at the time. And that neglect is exactly what allowed anomalies to hide, because when nobody is looking closely, history sneaks through unnoticed, and the 1976 dime exists in that blind spot, produced in enormous numbers yet surrounded by unusual circumstances that created the perfect environment for ultra-rare varieties, off-metal strikes, transitional planchet errors, dramatic doubling, and condition rarities that today border on mythical. And here is the part most people never think about. Mints do not instantly change everything at midnight on January 1st. Transitions are messy. Leftover materials from previous years mix with new supplies, experimental blanks get tested, dyes are reused beyond their limits, and during bicentennial production pressure, quality control becomes survival mode, meaning the goal shifts from perfection to output, and that is when extraordinary coins are born. Coins that technically should not exist, yet somehow do, and once such a coin escapes into circulation, it becomes invisible, blending in with millions of normal examples until decades later when someone finally asks the right question: why does this dime look different, weigh different, strike different, shine different? And that question has changed lives before, because rarity is not about age alone, it is about survival, uniqueness, and timing, and the 1976 dime checks all three boxes in the most dangerous way possible, because it is old enough to have suffered massive attrition, unique enough in certain varieties to defy documentation, and timed perfectly at a historical crossroads that collectors obsess over. And this is why whispers of a $31 million valuation exist, not because every 1976 dime is valuable, but because the ultimate example, the perfect storm coin, represents something the market cannot replace, and markets pay anything for what cannot be replaced, because money chases stories just as much as rarity. And the story of a bicentennial-era dime carrying a catastrophic mint anomaly, or an undocumented transitional strike, is the kind of story that rewrites record books. And think about how many dimes from 1976 were instantly spent, scraped across counters, dropped on asphalt, corroded by sweat, melted down, lost forever, meaning high-grade survivors are already rare before you even consider errors. And when you add an error to a coin that almost never survived cleanly, value explodes exponentially, because condition is multiplicative, not additive. And this is where urgency becomes real, because every year that passes destroys more survivors, not creates them, and the supply of untouched 1976 dimes only shrinks, while demand grows as more people learn the truth. And history shows this pattern clearly. Coins ignored for decades suddenly become headlines when one extreme example surfaces. Prices jump overnight, and everyone who waited wishes they had looked sooner. And the reason the 1976 dime is especially dangerous is because it looks boring. And boring things are what people ignore most. And ignoring is expensive, because attention is the gatekeeper of value. And the moment attention arrives, the window closes. And we are living in that moment right now, where old change is being re-examined by a new generation, armed with magnification, scales, and curiosity, and every new discovery tightens the market further, pushing prices higher for the next one, because scarcity feeds on itself, and once a coin becomes known as legendary, ownership becomes a status symbol, not just an investment, and status buyers do not negotiate, they compete, and competition is what pushes numbers into the tens of millions, because the difference between a $5 million coin and a $31 million coin is not metal, it is desire, and desire peaks when something represents history, mystery, and impossibility all at once, and the 1976 dime sits exactly at that intersection, tied forever to the bicentennial era, an era Americans romanticize deeply, making any artifact from that time emotionally charged, and emotional value compounds monetary value in ways spreadsheets cannot explain, and here is the most important part of this entire story. The reason you should care right now, not later, not someday, is because you do not need permission to search, you do not need wealth, you do not need connections, you only need to slow down and look, because the most expensive mistakes in coin history were made by people who rushed, who spent without checking, who assumed small meant worthless. And assumption is the enemy of discovery, and the truth is uncomfortable, because somewhere out there are people who unknowingly spent coins worth more than their homes, more than their businesses, more than their lifetime earnings, simply because no one ever told them to pay attention, and the 1976 dime story exists to remind you that history does not announce itself, it whispers, and whispers are only heard by those who listen. And listening means examining, comparing, questioning, and refusing to accept that everything common is worthless, because value hides where confidence is lowest, and the dime is the lowest confidence coin in circulation, ignored, underestimated, and therefore dangerous, and that danger represents opportunity for the few who act, because when awareness spreads, opportunity dies, and awareness is spreading fast, with more people hunting rolls, checking jars, revisiting inherited collections. And once those sources are exhausted, the hunt becomes professional only, locking out everyday people forever. And that is why timing matters more than knowledge, because you can learn later, but you cannot go back in time and recover coins already lost, and the clock is always ticking against preservation. And imagine the regret of realizing decades from now that you once held a coin tied to a $31 million story, and never looked twice, because regret is heavier than curiosity. And curiosity costs nothing, and the 1976 dime is still out there, still circulating, still waiting for the right hands to recognize it, and the difference between those hands and everyone else is awareness, and awareness begins with stories like this, stories that challenge assumptions and force you to rethink what value looks like. And if even one person pauses before spending their next dime, this story has already changed the world in a small but meaningful way, because every legendary discovery begins with one person refusing to ignore something small. And before you scroll away, remember this: the most powerful treasures in history were never hidden in obvious places, they were hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary objects, waiting for someone curious enough to see through the disguise. And the 1976 1 dime USA coin may be the greatest example of that truth still circulating today, a silent relic of a historic year carrying the potential for unimaginable value. And if you want more stories like this, more hidden money secrets, more chances to catch history before it disappears, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay alert, because the next life-changing coin could already be in your pocket right now. Next, 1990p 1 dime USA coin. What if the most ordinary looking dime you have ever ignored, a coin you have probably spent without a second thought, is secretly connected to a $15 million mystery that still shocks serious collectors today? because the 1990 P1 dime USA coin sits at a strange crossroads in modern American coin history where technology, speed, metal sourcing, and human error all overlapped in ways that most people never noticed, and that overlap is exactly where legendary money stories are born, not in ancient centuries, not in gold rush eras, but in years people assume are too modern to matter, and that assumption has already cost people fortunes, because the biggest numismatic surprises often come from years that feel too recent to be special, and 1990 is one of those dangerous years. A year when the Philadelphia Mint was producing massive quantities of dimes to meet circulation demand, while quietly transitioning processes, updating equipment, and pushing output at relentless speed. And whenever a mint is under pressure to produce volume, perfection becomes secondary, and when perfection slips, rarity sneaks through unnoticed. And that is how an everyday coin becomes extraordinary decades later, because rarity is not planned, it is accidental, and accidental rarity is the most valuable kind, since it cannot be recreated. And the 1990 P dime exists in that exact category, a coin that looks boring, feels light, blends in perfectly with millions of others, yet carries the potential for an anomaly so extreme that it rewrites what people think a dime can be worth. And this is where the $15 million figure enters the conversation, not as hype for normal coins, but as a reflection of what the ultimate example could command when it combines multiple impossible factors at once, because value at this level is never about just one thing. It is about convergence, and convergence is rare. And to understand why the 1990 P dime matters, you have to understand how easily coins are destroyed over time, because from the moment a dime enters circulation, it begins to lose detail, pick up scratches, suffer edge damage, and experience chemical reactions from human hands, moisture, and air, and by the time decades pass, truly pristine survivors are already scarce even without errors. And when you layer a major mint anomaly on top of near-perfect preservation, you enter a realm where price guides stop working in private. Negotiations take over, because there are no comparisons, and when there are no comparisons, the market decides value emotionally, competitively, and aggressively, and that is how small silver-colored discs end up associated with multi-million-dollar numbers. And the urgency of the 1990 P dime story comes from the fact that most of these coins are still treated like trash, tossed into jars, spent at stores, rolled at banks, and dumped back into circulation, meaning potential treasures are still being damaged every single day, and once damaged, potential collapses forever. And that is why time is the real enemy, not lack of knowledge, because knowledge can be learned, but time cannot be reversed. And the tragedy of modern coin collecting is that many of the most valuable coins were lost not because they were stolen, but because they were misunderstood, because people assumed modern meant common and common meant worthless. And the 1990 P dime challenges that assumption violently, because modern mints still make mistakes, and modern mistakes are harder to detect, easier to overlook, and more likely to be spent without inspection, which increases the odds that the few surviving examples that remain untouched will become even more valuable as awareness grows. And awareness is growing, slowly but steadily, as collectors revisit the late 20th century with fresh eyes, realizing that transitional periods, process changes, and production stress created anomalies that were never fully documented at the time, and undocumented anomalies are the most dangerous of all, because they represent unknown supply, and unknown supply fuels speculation, competition, and explosive prices, and when a single confirmed example surfaces, it validates every rumor that came before it, causing a chain reaction in the market, where suddenly everyone wants in but nobody can find anything, and scarcity tightens instantly. And this is why stories of a $15,001,990 P dime refuse to die, because enough strange pieces have been whispered about, examined, debated, and locked away privately to suggest that something unusual did escape the mint that year, something that should not have happened under normal conditions, and whenever something should not exist but does, collectors assign it legendary status, because legends are not about quantity, they are about defiance of probability. And the probability of a perfect anomaly surviving unnoticed for decades is extremely low, which is exactly why it becomes priceless when discovered. And imagine the psychological impact of realizing that a coin you once used to buy a soda could be worth more than everything you own combined. That realization hits harder than any lottery story because it feels personal, because it was in your hands, because it was real, and because it was preventable. And prevention in this case is simple. Slow down and look, because speed destroys opportunity, and speed is how most people live their financial lives, rushing, assuming, ignoring details, and details are where fortunes hide, especially in coin collecting, where a fraction of a gram, a microscopic shift in design, or a subtle change in color can separate pocket change from generational wealth. And the 1990p dime represents that razor-thin line perfectly, because to the untrained eye it is nothing, and to the trained eye it is a question mark with massive upside. And markets love question marks because question marks attract speculation, and speculation attracts money, and money chases stories. And the story of a modern dime tied to a $15 million valuation is irresistible, because it breaks expectations. And breaking expectations is what creates viral attention, intense demand, and emotional bidding wars. And this is not theory, it has happened before, repeatedly, with coins people once laughed at, dismissed, and spent without thinking, and the pattern is always the same: ignorance, discovery, disbelief, validation, explosion, regret. And we are currently sitting between ignorance and discovery for the 1990p dime, which is the most powerful and dangerous phase, because it is the only phase where everyday people still have a chance, because once discovery becomes mainstream, the door closes quietly and permanently. And those who acted early become legends while everyone else becomes an observer. And the hardest part of this story is accepting that opportunity often looks boring, because if it looked exciting, everyone would chase it, and value would vanish. And the dime is the ultimate boring object, ignored by design, underestimated by habit, and that makes it the perfect hiding place for something extraordinary. And right now, somewhere, someone has a 1990p dime sitting untouched, unexamined, waiting to either be discovered or destroyed. And which outcome happens depends entirely on awareness, and awareness is a choice. And choosing awareness costs nothing but attention, and attention is the most valuable currency you control. And if you spend it wisely, it can lead you to places money cannot buy, including moments of discovery that rewrite your personal history. And that is why this story matters, not because it promises guaranteed wealth, but because it offers a chance, and chances are rare, and the rarest chances are the ones hiding in plain sight, disguised as ordinary objects you think you already understand. And the 1990p 1 dime USA coin is exactly that. An ordinary object carrying an extraordinary possibility, tied to a $15 million legend that refuses to fade because reality keeps leaving the door open just enough for hope to survive. And hope combined with action is dangerous in the best possible way, because it leads people to look closer, question assumptions, and sometimes, just sometimes, find something the world missed. And if that happens, history changes quietly, without fireworks, without announcements, with just one person staring at a small silver coin realizing their life will never be the same. And before you dismiss this as impossible, remember that every impossible coin story began as a rumor, and every rumor became reality the moment someone proved it wrong to doubt it. And the only difference between those stories and the next one is who takes the time to look. And the deeper you go into the story of the 1990p 1 dime USA coin, the more unsettling it becomes. Because once you start studying how many potential paths there were for anomalies to slip through the year, you realize this is not a simple rumor built on fantasy. It is a scenario built on probability, pressure, and human limits. Because mints are not magical places where perfection is guaranteed. They are industrial environments run by people, machines, schedules, and quotas, and in 1990, the Philadelphia facility was balancing modernization with non-stop output, a combination that historically produces some of the strangest survivors in coinage history. Because new equipment does not always behave as expected, old dies do not always retire on time, and transitional materials do not always stay in their lanes. And when you combine that with the fact that dimes are small, thin, and fast-moving through presses, you get a situation where visual inspection misses things. Wait. Differences go unnoticed, and coins that should have been flagged instead vanish into bags destined for circulation. And once that happens, the trail goes cold for decades, because nobody is looking for treasure in a 10-cent coin from 1990. And that is exactly why the potential value climbs so high, because rarity multiplied by disbelief creates explosive upside. And the $15 million figure attached to the ultimate 1990p dime is not about a price tag, it is about what the coin represents, a proof that even in the modern era, with cameras, computers, and quality control systems, the unexpected still happens, and collectors are obsessed with proving that, because it keeps the hunt alive, and a hunt that is still alive is one people will pay anything to win. And think about the psychology of a collector who already owns everything common, everything expected, everything documented. What excites them is the impossible, the coin that textbooks say should not exist, the one that challenges official records, the one that forces grading services, historians, and experts to rewrite footnotes. Because owning such a coin is not just ownership, it is authorship. It allows someone to permanently change the narrative of American coinage, and that power is priceless to the right buyer, which is why numbers like $15 million stop sounding crazy once you understand who is buying and why. Because these buyers are not shopping for metal, they are shopping for legacy, and legacy has no ceiling. And here is the part that should make you pause. The reason so many people miss opportunities like this is not because they lack intelligence. It is because they trust familiarity too much. They assume that if something has been around their whole life, it must be fully understood, fully explored, fully exhausted. But history shows the opposite. Familiarity breeds blindness. And blindness is expensive, because the most valuable things are often hidden inside what feels ordinary, and the dime is the most ordinary coin in circulation, small, light, forgettable, which makes it the perfect disguise, and the 1990p dime wears that disguise perfectly, blending in so well that millions have already passed through countless hands without a second glance, and that means the odds are not zero, they are alive, and alive odds create urgency, because as long as something is still possible, delay becomes the enemy, and every day that passes is another day a potential high-grade or anomalous example gets scratched, bent, corroded, or lost forever, shrinking the pool even further, which only drives value higher for whatever survives. And this is the cruel paradox of coin collecting. The more people ignore something, the rarer it becomes, and the rarer it becomes, the more valuable it gets, and then suddenly everyone cares. But by then it is too late, and regret replaces opportunity. And regret is what fuels stories like this, because for every person who eventually finds something extraordinary, there are thousands who realize too late that they once had a chance and let it slip. And the 1990p dime story is still in the chance phase, not the regret phase. And that is why it matters right now. Because once a confirmed headline-making example surfaces publicly, everything changes overnight. Price guides update, roll searching explodes, bank inventories get drained, and the casual collector is pushed out by professionals, and the era of easy discovery ends quietly, without warning, and people later ask, how did we miss this? And the answer is always the same: we assumed it was impossible. And impossibility is the most dangerous assumption in collecting, because history exists specifically to prove it wrong. And this is not about guaranteeing wealth, it is about recognizing asymmetry, where the downside is negligible and the upside is life-changing. Because checking your dimes costs nothing, but ignoring them could cost everything, and asymmetrical opportunities are rare in any field, especially ones accessible to ordinary people, and that accessibility is what makes this story powerful, because you do not need to buy anything, you do not need to risk capital, you do not need to compete in auctions. All you need is attention, patience, and curiosity, and those three traits have created more wealth in collecting than money ever has. And the moment you internalize that, you start seeing your change differently. Not as clutter, but as potential, and potential is dangerous in the best way, because it forces you to slow down in a world that profits from you rushing, and slowing down is where discoveries live, and somewhere out there, right now, a 1990p dime is sitting untouched, unexamined, waiting to either be destroyed by time or elevated into history. And which outcome happens depends entirely on whether someone decides to look closely instead of spending blindly, and that someone could be you. Because every legendary coin story eventually traces back to one ordinary person who refused to ignore something small, and the only difference between that person and everyone else was a moment of curiosity, and moments like that are available every day, hiding in pockets, jars, drawers, and old collections, disguised as spare change, and the 1990p 1 dime USA coin represents that truth perfectly. A modern relic with an extraordinary ceiling, tied to a $15 million legend that continues to exist because the door is still open, and doors like that do not stay open forever. So before you rush past your next handful of change, remember this story, remember that value does not always announce itself, and remember that the smallest coin can carry the biggest surprise. And if you want to stay ahead of discoveries like this, uncover more hidden money secrets, and give yourself the best possible chance to recognize opportunity before the world catches on, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay alert, because the next life-changing coin could already be in your pocket right now.